to Interview with Miss Panda. I am Amanda Schoen-Blodgett, Miss Panda. Today, my special guest is Becky Morales. She is the creator of the wonderful website, Kid World Citizen. It is a website with activities that helps young minds go global. She's also the author of the book, The Global Education Toolkit for Elementary Learners. And she's also a teacher, a ESL teacher, a teacher trainer, a speaker, and also educational consultant. And most importantly, she's a mother to 5 adorable children, multicultural, bilingual children. And let's welcome Becky Morales.
Thank you so much, Amanda. It is so good to be here. And I'm really happy to talk with you today about my book and about ideas of how we can teach kids about the world.
You are so busy, as I can see your website, resourceful website, full of activities for children, parents, and teachers to use in the classroom and at home. And also, you have 5 children and a book, and you do a lot of teaching as well. My first question for you, do you have time to sleep and rest? And how do you manage all that?
That's a really good question. Luckily, so I have 5 kids, but the 4 older kids are in school during the day. They're in 4th grade, 2nd, and 1st grade. And then my 1-year-old takes a nice long nap in the afternoon, which is how I'm able to speak with you right now. But I get a lot of my work done at night when they go to bed. That's when I get a lot of my work done.
All right. Yeah, I know. Sometimes you think about this. How do you do that? That's wonderful because I think a lot of the resources you provide definitely are very helpful for the families who are interested in raising young world citizens, and then also to raise the global awareness and cultural awareness at home, and for teachers as well. It's a great resource. So you have a multicultural family, and would you like to touch on the cultural background of your family and how does it all started? You are so passionate about teaching culture and global awareness, global education to children.
Sure. So my husband and I got married. He was actually an exchange student from Mexico, and I had just gotten back from studying abroad in Spain, and they matched us up as buddies at the university. So we met on this, in an international club, that's what it was called. And we always knew that we were going to travel, and we wanted to, teach our kids about both of our cultures, American and Mexican culture. And then we had 2 daughters, and after I couldn't have any more kids, we decided to adopt. Adoption was in my family because my brother and sister were actually adopted from Peru when I was 15. So I have it in my family already. So I kind of had this idea. So we adopted my son from China, and he's actually a little bit older than my older daughter. And then a couple years later, we adopted my son from Ethiopia. So we have Mexico, China, and Ethiopia, and United States cultures. And I'm really involved with the adoptive community, and so I was just developing little activities that we could do at home to introduce Chinese culture and then later Ethiopian culture, just like different recipes we could try and different celebrations and different books, and we were trying to learn a little bit of Mandarin, and I really reached out to the Chinese community, because my older son, and we were going to the community center and taking Mandarin at a temple. It was really, really fun. And a lot of adoptive families asked me to share what I was doing. So I put this little website up that I thought was just going to be this little tiny project to share what we do. And it kind of got bigger and bigger, and then people would write comments, well, don't only do China and Mexico, like what other cultures, can you teach us about? So I just started doing more research, and I started teaching the kids more about Diwali in India. We live in an area of the city that has a lot of Indians and Pakistanis and Middle Eastern. So we started doing a lot of those holidays and reading books about it and learning about their clothes and learning about their traditions. And it kind of exploded into this big website, and now I'm trying to get all corners of the globe. I haven't totally gotten every country yet, but I'm trying to really teach my kids to learn about the people around them, because the world is so interconnected now that you will only be more successful if you learn about the people beyond our little community.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a very interesting. You talk about, you reach out to the local community, to the Chinese community, and I think at one part I read about you kind of outreach to the Ethiopian church, and then to be able to let your kids keep their heritage culture. And how do you keep it fun? In addition to learning the language and doing the recipes, and how do you expand from their heritage languages to other cultures, because you talk about you have Mexico culture, Mexican culture, U.S., China, and also Ethiopia, and how do you do that? And then because on your website you have all kinds of different continents, you touch on something. I think that's something very fascinating. How do you keep your kids engaged in learning more about other culture, and how do you do that when you are at school?
Mm-hmm. So there's kind of three things. The first thing is that you have to see what your kids are passionate about, and that's usually a route to learn about another culture. So, for example, my son is obsessed with sports and soccer, football. So he just loves it. So when the World Cup was on, we were constantly looking at the maps, find the country. Why does this region of the world, for example, Latin America, have so many teams, but in Asia, there wasn't, that many teams. He wanted to root for an Asian team, and he was a little bit like, oh man, we got to get some more Asian teams in soccer. So it was interesting because we could tie geography into something he was already going to be interested in. And so I do the same thing. My other son from Ethiopia really likes to cook. I think he really likes to eat. So then, therefore, he wants to learn how to cook because he loves to eat. And so that's how we can touch base with the Ethiopian culture. Is every once in a while we go into the city, we go to the Ethiopian supermarket, we buy the injera, because the bread I have found is hard to make. So we buy the bread and we get some ingredients. He knows the shop owners, and then we bring it back here when we make our Ethiopian food. And for him, that's one of many ways that he touches base with his culture. It's harder with some cultures. So Chinese, I think like 60% of our school is Asian, so we don't really have a problem finding Chinese families. There's tons of them. All of our neighbors are Chinese or Taiwanese or from Hong Kong. So it's very easy for Tonito to be invited to Chinese New Year party, or to go see Yao Ming play basketball, or to kind of do all these fun activities. Ethiopia is a little bit harder because there's not a huge population. So there is a church that we found that's very welcoming and is very happy to have any families come visit them. And frequently they have festivals after the church service. They'll have like a big festival to celebrate a holiday. But also what we did, we were trying to think creatively, and we found a student who was from Ethiopia, but she now lives in Norway. And so she came to live with us for a year as an exchange student. She's just a high school student. And it's been really fun to keep in touch with her, because when she was here, she kind of showed us more dishes, and she taught us more about the culture, and even just little traditions. She had a death in the family, and we got to learn all about the traditions of grieving and the ceremonies and the different things that happen. So I think anytime you can make a connection with the community, it's just priceless, because you're going to find things that you can't learn in books or in, on TV or...
Absolutely. Yeah. That's very true. I mean, you talk about soccer, and we moved to Ecuador, and my son also is very interested in soccer, even though he was introduced to soccer when we were in the States. But here it's such a big deal. So like they're during the break, in the school, that's what they do. They play soccer together, and that's how he's picking up Spanish, by playing soccer with friends. And also, when there was the celebration for the Three Kings Day, and he came home, he said, hey, everybody's talking about something about the Three Kings Day. I say, yeah, did you see those cakes we saw with a crown in the bakery? They say, and then he said, yes. And then he said, does it mean that we're going to get more presents? I say, well, traditionally on this day, that's when the kids actually here are getting presents. And he said, that's great, tell me more about it, and I would like to get presents too. So I told him a little bit about it, and he went out to cut all the grass, and then he put it in front of the door for the camel and the Three Kings. I think absolutely. I mean, when you have the culture nearby, I think is an easy way to learn more about it. And I love your the way you do it, you invite actually the culture to your home, and then to let the kids experience the cultural perspective of a different part of the world. So actually that connects to my next question regarding your new book, the Global Education Toolkit for Elementary Learners. I think you probably want to show everybody your book, and then also what can parents do and teachers do and benefit from your book and learn from all the activities you introduce to everybody, and to make global education a part of home and also a part of the school.
Yeah. So not everyone has immigrant groups that live right next door that can help. And so the other kind of two key components are your library, your local library, and the internet. If you have a library and internet, you really have the whole world of possibilities right at your fingertips. So there's an organization called the Asia Society, and they came up with 4 main ideas of how we can get kids, how we can incorporate global education into the classroom. So their first thing that they say is that we need to have kids investigating the world. So that means it can be anything from watching a YouTube video or reading a newspaper that comes from that country. Like, for example, when there was a tsunami, did we only look at CNN tsunami reporting, or did we ever look at Japan tsunami reporting? And so kind of like investigating the world outside, like what's going on and how can we learn about it? And taking the different perspectives is the second one. So maybe we think that it's really great that we're recycling, or that we're doing this for the environment. How does that affect people on the other side of the world? Are they able to recycle? Do they even have a recycling program? Maybe that's not the best thing. Maybe we need to be making products that don't have so much waste, or kind of balancing the different perspectives based on another person's perspective. And it also teaches the kids, I'm not always right. Sometimes there's more than one right answer. And sometimes it's helpful if you talk to the people in the actual place that it's happening to see, what would be the better solution. And then they also talk about communicating ideas. That's the third idea. Talking about ideas with someone either from a different accent, from a different culture, in a different language. Because negotiating that meaning, trying to have a conversation with someone that's not from your exact culture, that's a skill that takes, you really have to build up to that. Even just listening and trying to hear when someone has just a slight accent or they're using different words than you, even if you're both speaking the same language. And so in our book, we have a lot of different ways that classrooms and families can connect with others who are interested in another part of the world to do little tasks. For example, there's something called the Global Read Aloud, and it's a book club. Everyone reads the same book, and then you get to meet another class that's reading the same book, and you give your ideas of what's happening. So you might meet on a Google Hangout like we're doing, or you might just meet over email. You might just send each other questions, or you might meet on Twitter, or you might send each other a picture of your final project. But it connects classrooms, and there's like hundreds. I'm just giving one example, but there's hundreds of examples of how we can meet these other classes and practice that communication. And then the last piece is the take action. Asia Society says, okay, so you've gained perspective and you've learned about the world, and what are you going to do about it? How can we empower kids to do something that will really change the world? And so we have a whole chapter on service projects that are globally connecting 2 places. My favorite one is there's a women's co-op in Rwanda that it's widows, and they weave yarn. And then you can buy the yarn, and it comes with a kit, and it teaches you how to knit a hat. And then they encourage you to donate that hat to a local hospital. So it's like a 3-pronged, you're buying the wool from someone who's earning an honest living, and then you're learning a craft, and you're learning about Rwanda and the women there, and then you get to donate it to a newborn hospital. And so it's kind of like you're giving to, 2 places at once. So we have a whole chapter on service learning and ways that you can get kids to think about people beyond themselves, because so often our kids are so lucky. We just grow up, we're so lucky. We have everything at our fingertips. So let's do something with it and see if we can really change the world.
That is fascinating, because I think the community service-oriented projects actually, it's like a learning, it's like a project-based learning, and then a lot of times actually that encourage kids to do more because they realize that, wow, even I am here, there are other kids on the other side of the world, and they are doing things differently. And this is how we eat, but this is the way they eat, or they are not as fortunate as we are to have all the supplies we need at school. So I think when we do a service project, I think that really encourages kids to actually learn more about that culture and then have fun at the same time. That is really interesting. And another thing you talk about, I think in your book also, you probably encourage parents to be involved in some of the learning, global awareness education as well, because you have different subjects. So what parents can do to bring the culture, even though it's not their heritage culture, could be the heritage culture, like me, because my heritage culture is Chinese. So I would go in every year to do a Chinese culture presentation for my kids, and then whenever I have an opportunity, I would go in to help the school to do certain things. And what would your recommendation for parents, you know, if they don't have a specific culture, but they're interested in, what can they do at school to help more kids to learn about it?
Sure. So that's one of the first chapters we have, is just little tiny ideas, more than 50 ideas of how you can incorporate some global learning into your school. And we have found that most of these initiatives come from the parents, not the teachers, because the teachers are really busy. So that chapter focuses on things that parents can do. So for example, our school didn't have any global learning, really. And so we started an international club, and at the very beginning of the year, at the very first day when they meet the teachers, we had a big sign that said, "Can you say friend in another language?" So everyone was coming over like, "Oh, I know how to say it in Chinese, I know how to say it in Spanish, I know how." So we wrote it all down, and then within our international club of moms, we made a really beautiful hallway display, and we had it up for the kids. So on the first day of school, or the first month of school, they had this beautiful display. And it just got kids thinking, because I think sometimes they kind of know there's other languages, but they might not really know what that means. So then when they see Arabic and they say, "That looks so different, they don't use the same letters that we do," or they see, maybe they see Mandarin and Cantonese and something else and say, "Those characters look really similar, those languages must be similar." And so it's really interesting. Or they'll see amigo and amico and ami, you know, from the Romance languages, and they'll say, "Oh, those are kind of all the same." So it's just a little tiny opening of their eyes, something that's simple that a parent can do. But we have a list of 300 multicultural books. I think books are like huge, because kids are so enraptured by books. They just want to listen to the story, and they just stare at the pictures, and they're soaking it all in, that it's really an opportunity that's not threatening. It's just very passive, and they're just sitting there and they're learning about another culture without even really realizing it, because it's such an engaging story. And I think what the parents can do is be very discerning of what stories they're choosing. So for example, if they're learning about American Indians, the parents need to be really careful that they're picking books that are showing, first of all, not just these overgeneralizations only about the past, and they're talking about these stereotypes that really aren't true. Instead, they should be looking for stories that are contemporary. I mean, American Indians are alive now, and they have lives now in a culture that's alive today. And they can look through, I give a lot of recommendations on my website, and there's a lot of other good websites that really say, instead of picking these books that show, that just say Indians wear feathers, you know, in their caps or something. It's so terrible. And then there's these really great books that are like The Jingle Dancer. It's a real girl gonna dress up for a powwow, and she's gonna do a dance, and it's just, the kids love those kind of stories. So I think parents' job is kind of like to pick the right books for the kids.
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, that's very true, because a lot of times, a lot of things we learn about history of a culture, but we also need to know what is going on now. I mean, that's absolutely fascinating. I think your story about the International Club of Moms, I think that's a great idea for all the parents. And I think, you know, I'm so happy to hear that actually, you know, a lot of times the parents are the ones to initiate actually a lot of projects at the school to help the school to raise the global awareness and also cultural awareness of our children. I think that's fantastic. We're going to talk about a little bit about your bilingual parenting journey, because we talk about the culture, and then you also have Spanish and English at home. And I know at one point you guys were all learning Mandarin Chinese. How do you maintain all the languages in your family?
So we keep trying different methods to see what's going to work. So we first were doing. I was speaking English and my husband was speaking Spanish, but it wasn't enough Spanish because he works really long hours, and because I'm the mom that's staying a lot of time with the kids, and I'm speaking the same language that they're getting at school and outside the home, it was too much English and not enough Spanish. So then we changed and we said, okay, let's do Spanish inside, and then we'll, English outside. And that was working, but we needed more. We needed more Spanish because they're in school a long time and they have so many activities. So we're trying to also find friends that speak Spanish with their kids. So when we go to a birthday party, it's in Spanish, and when we go to a playgroup, it's in Spanish, and we're trying to incorporate that. We also do travel back to Mexico for kind of intensive boosts of our language, because I think it helps the kids to remember what they really know. It's just kind of back in their brain. I think a lot of times kids, it's like they go through waves where they become stronger in one and then weaker in the other, and then kind of changes. But the travel really has always helped us to go back for like a month or at least a couple weeks, and then kind of refresh their memory. And the Mandarin,
yes.
We tried. We were in Mandarin classes for like 3 years on Saturdays, and the best part was we learned a lot about the culture, because we were going into this Taiwanese temple, and there were other classes going on, like they took drawing classes and singing classes and different things. We had to drop it because our schedules were conflicting, but we always have our books around, and we're always trying to remember a little bit, and I hope that it's still in the back of their brain, so when they want to pick it up again, they'll be able to engage that part.
Absolutely. I think they will definitely remember, because I think the languages they have learned when they were little, it will always be there. When they are ready to learn it again, it will come back. I mean, my daughter learned some French when she was little, during the time we lived in Quebec, Canada. And she will tell you, she said, I don't remember French anymore, Mom. But every time if we listen to a song in French, and then every year we try to explore culture, and in the year we did French, I think she said, wow, this is really interesting. I think I kind of remember. I think that's how amazing kids are. But I think it's really, really interesting to see how they proceed, and then to retain the language, and then how they can get it back later on. And also, do you have anything you can show us when you teach cultures? I think it will be fun. Everybody wants to know, what are the items that you must have when you teach cultures to your children?
Okay, so we for sure always have a globe. I have my globe in the background here. A globe and a map are, I think, two of the most important things. I have it on placemats. I have a laminated map that you can use dry erase markers on, and then you can circle things, and you just can wipe it down with a Kleenex afterwards so it doesn't mark up the map. And we use that a lot because like for example, when we were talking about, there was some earthquake in Mexico, and then later they said, oh, there was a little bit of an earthquake also in Peru at the same time. So I was showing the kids, do you see how the mountains are connected? And I was showing, if you have a little earthquake here, you're probably going to have some down here, and we kind of like followed the Andes. And it was neat for them, because sometimes kids, that's like, it's such an abstract concept, distance, time, and they just can't really think about it. I love showing them where the equator is, and then I show them where the tropics are, and we color it in, and I say, okay, so what is their weather? All these people that live in this band, they have very, very similar weather. And then they're like, that's why the Amazon is there. I'm like, yeah, that's why the Amazon is there. And if you look at the belt that goes over Africa, and there's a belt that goes over Indonesia, and they kind of can start to remember. And then we talk about, well, so if that's the weather, how does that affect their clothing that they're wearing, their housing that they're living in, the food that they're eating? And then you can kind of bring in all these lessons, because They're like, oh, they must all eat like a lot of fruits because it grows there. Yeah. And what about, do you think they need winter coats and like, you know, the Eskimos, or do you think they need to wear all these? Like, no, Mommy, they have to wear, you know, it's too hot there. And so we talk about that. And so I think maps are really key, because the earlier we can get kids looking at maps and kind of excited and kind of just to be able to think about it, they don't really get geography. Geography is not a necessary class to graduate anymore in the United States. And so if we're not teaching in elementary school, they're going to get to high school and they're not going to know anything about geography. I mean, it's really sad. I say this in my book. I used to teach Spanish class, and I was talking about how the Arabic influence came up from Morocco, and then it was in Spain for 700 years, and I was talking about the architecture. I didn't say the continent. I said, so this is Spain, and I said, so what's this continent down here? And they go, South America. And I'm like, no, by Europe. I said, we're looking at Europe, and they're all just looking at me. I'm like, guys, Africa. And they were like, Africa's that close? Is that close to Europe? And I'm just like, you guys are teenagers. And so I always feel like we have to start when they're younger. And one of the things that we do that's really fun, and anyone can do it at home, I've done this with my kids twice now, and they really like it. So the top circle, I actually did this in Spanish. You can see the words are in Spanish, but you can put it in any language. So we did my house. That's the smallest thing. That's the closest to where we are. And then a bigger concept is my city. And so they had to draw a little picture of what their city represents. And then we do the state. And this is an old idea, but I like to regurgitate it. They have their state there, and then they have their country, and then they have their continent, and then they have the planet. And then one of my readers wrote in that she did like the galaxy, or, you know, she like kept going the solar system, and then she did the galaxy. So you could kind of keep going, I guess. But I think it's helpful for kids to be able to categorize it and remember that their city is smaller than their state. I was shocked that my daughter didn't know that. She was like, so are we in Texas or Houston? I said, well, we're in I said, Houston is in Texas. And we travel so much to different states. They're always going, well, is Illinois in the United States? Do they speak English there? I said, yeah. And they're like, but I heard people speaking Spanish. I said, well, you can speak Spanish in the United States, but it's not part of Mexico, because they always want to know if we're going to Mexico. And then we went to New Mexico, and they're like, are we going to Mexico? Or what's New Mexico? I'm like, well, it's still part of the United States. So I'm just constantly using maps with my kids to show them, just so they can be more aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
And I do use a lot of different multicultural books. I like to do it kind of by themes, and so
that's one of my favorite books.
I was gonna say, I bet you've read this book. So because Chinese New Year's is coming up, I've been getting out all my Chinese books, and it's fun because I try and balance it nonfiction and fiction, so we're not only doing folk tales. I mean, folk tales are really fun, but sometimes I think it's nice if we're also learning about people that actually live there. There's a really great book that I didn't have time to get out of the library, but it's called Kindergarten. It's something about kindergarten, and it's an upside-down book. So you read one of it this way, and it's about kids in China going to kindergarten. And then you flip it, and you read kids in the United States. Have you ever read that book?
I think so. I probably read that in the library with my daughter.
Yeah, it's really great for kids because you can say what was the same in China and United States kindergarten. And they're going to say, you know, oh, they both go outside for recess, and they both eat lunch, and they both read books. And then you say, well, what's different? And they say, well, when the Chinese class went out, they had to do exercises first, but when the United States went out, they went to the playground first. And then when the Chinese class ate lunch, they had soup, and they were eating with chopsticks, but the American class was doing this, whatever. And so it's good for kids to start saying, like, you know, we're a little different, but we're also the same. We're all going to eat. We're all going to play. You know, we're all going to learn something. It's just a little different way to do each of those things. And my kids really like those kind of stories. They really like, and there's videos, too, on YouTube that we'll sometimes watch, and they're like, wow, that's what, we found this one video of Japanese teenagers opening their lunch boxes, and it was an American teacher. He was teaching them English, and he was videotaping, and they had little bento boxes, and my kids thought it was the coolest thing. They were like, eating? That's so cool. And I said, yeah, and it was just, so little videos and little books like that really show the kids, you know, what life is like in another part of the planet. Actually, you were saying you were going to go do a Chinese New Year celebration. So I present at our school a Chinese New Year celebration. And what I do is I have a couple of books, and you can use any book, and I have a bunch of props like this. So I have like lanterns, and I have, you know, my little lion dancer.
All right, that's so cute.
So I have a whole
I have one too. I have a red one.
I knew you would. I was thinking I probably should think of another culture to explain.
I know, this is so fun. Well, it's great to see that.
So I have, like, you know, the dragon. I have a bunch of props, and I pass them out beforehand, and I tell the kids. I got them in Chinatown for like a couple dollars. I mean, they weren't expensive. And I said, when you hear the part of the story that says dragon, you need to stand up, and you need to make the dragon dance. And so when you hear the part about the fireworks, and then I have the fireworks, and I have bubble wrap, so it makes noises. I say, when you hear the part about the fireworks, you have to stand up and, you know, show it. So the kids are listening to the book like they can't miss their part. So they're just staring at me when I'm reading. And right when I say, and then they get mandarin oranges, the 3 girls that have mandarin oranges, they stand up and they're like, this is a mandarin orange. Then they get to come to the front. So the kids really like it because they're just really listening for the different parts. And I like to do props like that when you can, because I think it helps kids, especially the little kids. I do this presentation for preschool and kinder and first, and they need something. Sometimes they need like a little bit of
hands-on activities.
Yeah, hands-on. So it's fun. I have another. This is a great way for parents that want to share their culture. So you might think about doing this at your school. Instead of just talking about China and Taiwan for an hour, it's kind of hard to like, well, what do you talk about? There's like so much. If the kids are young, do the 5 senses. So bring in a couple things. Say, this is what you would smell, and then bring some spices. Or like for Ethiopia, I do coffee and garlic and chili powder. And then this is what you would touch. And then I bring in a special chair, I bring in some clothes they can touch, and I bring in a pretty cross because they have really nice metal work. And then I say, this is what you would hear, and I bring in some language taped so they could see what the language sounds like. And I have a tape of goats and like cows because they have a lot of land, cattle. And so I go through each of the senses, and it's not overwhelming for them, and they know what of the 5 senses they're listening for. And sometimes the teachers will have them draw a picture for, you know, what did you hear? And they draw a little picture. And what did you see? And what did you taste? And it's very concrete and concise, and it's a great lesson for kids. And parents can do that. You can tell a parent who's never taught, just bring me 5 items, 1 thing for each sense. And it's like a really quick 10-minute presentation. And the kids get to learn something.
I like that. I mean, seriously, it's a great idea. And then I actually read a post about bringing your post about this festival celebration and with all the spices and the 5 senses, because it's a very Montessori style. And I think when they can hear, they see, they touch, and they taste. Of course, they need to eat something. That's why every time when I do the Moon Festival celebration storytelling at a school, I always try to get some moon cakes there, because after you listen to a story, if you can taste it, they're like, ah, now I'll remember.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's very solid learning. It's a very solid learning when they can really, use their 5 senses to learn.
Well, it was so funny because the first time I did this, it was my first time, so I didn't really know. So I had all these props, and there was like 50 kids. It was at a library, and it was just really crazy. And then all of a sudden I said, at the very end, I said, so what, did you guys have fun? Like, did you learn? What did you learn? And this little boy just a little boy from the U.S. raised his hand. He goes, red is really popular in China. I had so many red things, and I was like, I didn't even mention that. I said, well, yeah, red is very good luck. And so then I said, everyone who's wearing red, stand up. And the kids were so proud, like, I'm wearing red. And it was so funny because it was something I forgot even to say, and the boy noticed that, and he learned, and he's like, I'm going to remember that. Red is lucky for Chinese New Year. And I said, yeah. So I think kids learn things just these kind of activities that are hands-on, they just engage the kids in so many ways, and the kids have so much fun too.
Absolutely. I think the parents, when parents are doing things like this at school, I think they enjoy that as well. Not only their own heritage culture, but also other languages, cultures they're interested in. And I think the hands-on activities are always very fun and helpful, for the kids to retain the information they have learned. And then usually during the Chinese New Year, if I have a class for the toddlers or preschoolers, usually what I would tell the parents or teachers is that, okay, make sure everybody wears red that day. And they got very curious. Why do we need to wear red? And that will always be the first thing they ask when they walk into the classroom and say, why red today, Miss Panda? And I think that's a part of curiosity actually help them to learn more about a culture.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Right. And wow, it's so fascinating, so many things to talk about. And one last question.
Yes.
Becky, what are your top advice for parents to teach children global awareness or cultural awareness? And what is your top advice for parents who are raising bilingual children?
I think my top advice for global learning is to admit to your kids that you don't know either. You're going to both learn together. And then take the initiative to go search out how you can both learn something about another culture. So either check out community centers in your area or a new supermarket. And if you're learning with your child, it's such a great experience for both of you to ask questions. People are so willing to share about their culture, more than you would think. You just start asking, what is this bread for? How do we eat this? And people will just be so generous with the information and help you to start to understand it. And you'll probably make some new friends that way too. And for raising multicultural children, I think just the more you practice and the more you can make it fun for your kids by playing a board game in another language or watching a movie or doing something that they like, instead of just thinking of grammar and vocabulary and kind of the academic areas, think of something fun. Like if you love to play Pictionary, play it in Spanish. Or if your daughter loves to make cupcakes, okay, we're going to do new cupcakes, but it's all going to be in Spanish while we're cooking. And it'll just give them a sense of fun, and they're not thinking that they're working so hard.
Yeah, I mean, simple advice, but very easy to apply at home. And thank you so much, Becky, the author of the Global Education Toolkit for Elementary Learners, and also the creator of the Kid World Citizen website. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your global education insights and also bilingual parenting ideas with us. So we really enjoyed having you with us today.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to talk to you all the way from Ecuador to Houston. This was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. And for all our wonderful audience, thank you for watching this episode of Interview with Miss Panda. And we'll see you next time. Have a fantastic day. Bye-bye. 我们下次见.
Bye.